The deafening crack of the whip split the late afternoon air as Victoria Everett fell to her knees in the dusty main street of Hot Springs, South Dakota. The year was 1883, and the 20-year-old woman with fiery amber eyes and copper hair had just committed the unforgivable sin of refusing to marry Jeremiah Blackstone, the wealthiest cattle baron in Lawrence County. "You'll learn respect, girl," shouted her father, Charles Everett, as he raised the whip for another strike, his weathered face twisted with rage and embarrassment. "No daughter of mine refuses a match that could save this family." Victoria's arms shielded her face as she braced for the next blow. The first had already torn through the back of her simple blue cotton dress. Blood trickled down her spine, but it was her pride that hurt most. The spectacle had drawn a crowd, shopkeepers, travelers, and townsfolk, all watching as a father publicly disciplined his disobedient daughter. "I will not marry a man who beats his servants and treats women like cattle," she cried out, defiance blazing despite her precarious position. The whip never fell. Instead, the sharp report of a revolver echoed through the street. A bullet kicked up dirt just inches from Charles Everett's boot. "That'll be enough of that, sir," came a deep, measured voice. The crowd parted as a tall figure moved forward. Mounted on a chestnut stallion was a man Victoria had never seen before. His face was partially shadowed by a wide-brimmed Stetson, but she could see the hard line of his jaw, sun-bronzed and set with determination. Dust coated his denim pants and leather chaps. A worn revolver, still smoking, was gripped firmly in his right hand. "This is family business," Charles sputtered, lowering the whip slightly. "You'd best move along, stranger." The newcomer dismounted in one fluid motion. He stood over 6 feet tall, broad-shouldered and lean-hipped. His eyes, clear and blue as a mountain lake, fixed on Charles with a stare that made the older man take an involuntary step back. "Name's Matthew Porter," he said, holstering his weapon with practiced ease. "And where I come from, men don't whip women in the street, family or otherwise." Charles bristled. "She's my daughter, and she's refusing a marriage that would save our ranch. The Everetts have worked that land for 15 years, and now we're about to lose it all because of her stubbornness." Matthew Porter's gaze shifted to Victoria, taking in her torn dress and the defiant tilt of her chin despite her position in the dirt. "Madam," he addressed her directly, ignoring her father entirely, "do you wish to marry this man your father speaks of?" Victoria struggled to her feet, wincing from the sting of the lash. "I do not," she stated firmly. "Jeremiah Blackstone is a cruel man. I've seen what he does to those who cross him." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Everyone in Hot Springs knew Blackstone's reputation and his power. "Then you won't," Matthew said simply. He turned back to Charles. "Sir, I'm offering this young woman my protection. She's free to make her own choice." Charles Everett's face purpled with rage. "You can't do that. She's my daughter, my responsibility." "Not anymore," Matthew replied. "Not if you're using that responsibility to harm her." His hand rested casually on his holstered gun. "I suggest you go home and reconsider your position on forcing your daughter to marry." Several of the townspeople nodded in approval. Even in the wild frontier of Dakota Territory, public beatings crossed a line many weren't comfortable with. Charles looked around, realizing he'd lost the crowd's sympathy. With a final venomous glare at Victoria, he spat on the ground. "You're no daughter of mine. Don't come back to the ranch." As he stormed off, Victoria felt the ground sway beneath her feet. Freedom had come at a terrible price. She was now homeless in a town where her father's influence ran deep, and she had made an enemy of Jeremiah Blackstone, a man not known for his forgiveness. "Thank you," she managed, though her voice trembled, "but you shouldn't have done that. You don't know what kind of man Blackstone is." Matthew Porter's expression softened slightly. I know enough about men like him. Are you hurt badly, Miss Everett? Before she could answer, her knees buckled. The cowboy moved with surprising speed, catching her before she hit the ground. Someone fetch the doctor, he called out to the dispersing crowd. I'm fine, Victoria protested weakly, though the world had begun to spin. Just need to rest a moment. You need more than rest, Matthew countered. You need a doctor, and then we need to figure out what comes next for you. As consciousness slipped away, Victoria heard him murmur, Don't worry, Miss Everett. You're safe now. When Victoria awoke, she found herself lying face down on an unfamiliar bed in a sparsely furnished room. Sunlight filtered through lace curtains, casting dappled patterns on wooden floorboards. Ah, you're awake, came a kind voice. Victoria turned her head carefully to see an older woman with silver-streaked hair pulled into a neat bun. She wore a practical dress and carried a basin of water. I'm Martha Wilson, the woman explained. This is my boarding house. Mr. Porter brought you here after Dr. Franklin tended to your back. Memories flooded back the public humiliation, her father's rage, the stranger's intervention. Victoria attempted to sit up but gasped as pain lanced across her shoulders. Easy now, Martha cautioned. The doctor said you need to rest. That lash cut deep, but thankfully it should heal without leaving too severe a scar. Victoria sank back onto the bed. Mr. Porter, where is he? Downstairs. Been pacing the floor half the night, worried about you. Never seen a man look so concerned for someone he just met. Martha's eyes twinkled with amusement. Quite handsome, too, if you don't mind my saying. Despite her situation, Victoria felt heat rise to her cheeks. He helped me when no one else would. Well, he's paid for this room for 2 weeks, Martha informed her, setting down the basin. Said you needed time to recover and figure things out. Victoria's eyes widened. He did what? But I can't accept. You can and you will, came a deep voice from the doorway. Matthew Porter stood there, hat in hand. Without the tension of confrontation, Victoria could see him clearly for the first time. He was younger than she'd first thought, perhaps no more than 30. His face was weathered from the sun and wind, with smile lines at the corners of his eyes suggesting he laughed more often than he frowned. His hair was the rich brown of fertile soil, and those remarkable blue eyes seemed to see right through her. Miss Everett, he nodded politely. How are you feeling? Better, thank you, she replied, suddenly conscious of her disheveled appearance and the thin nightgown that had replaced her torn dress. But Mr. Porter, I cannot possibly accept your charity. You've done more than enough already. He stepped into the room, maintaining a respectful distance. It's not charity. Consider it a loan if you like, but you need time to heal and decide what comes next. Martha quietly excused herself, leaving them alone. Victoria struggled to sit up, clutching the sheet to her chest. Why would you do this for a stranger? You don't know me. Matthew's expression turned grim. I know what happens to women with no protection in towns like this. I know what men like Blackstone are capable of. He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. And I know what it's like to stand alone against someone with power and influence. Something in his tone suggested personal experience, but Victoria didn't press. Instead, she asked, Are you staying in Hot Springs long? I was just passing through, he admitted. On my way to Deadwood. I've got a small stake in a silver mine there that needs attention. Victoria nodded slowly. Then I won't keep you. Once I'm recovered, I'll find work and repay your kindness. Matthew studied her for a moment. What kind of work do you do, Miss Everett? I've helped run my father's ranch since my mother died 5 years ago, she answered. I can keep books, manage household affairs, and I'm good with horses. Pride straightened her shoulders despite the pain. I'm not afraid of hard work, Mr. Porter. A small smile touched his lips. I believe that. But Hot Springs might not be the safest place for you now. Blackstone has connections throughout this county. I have nowhere else to go, Victoria admitted, the harsh reality of her situation sinking in. Her few friends in town were too afraid of her father's or Blackstone's influence to offer help. Matthew seemed to consider something, turning his hat in his hands. There's a position opening at the Silver Creek Ranch near Deadwood. The housekeeper is leaving to care for her ailing sister. The owner is a friend of mine, good man, fair employer. You'd be safe there. Hope flickered in Victoria's chest. You do that. Recommend me for a position, if you're interested, he replied. I'm heading that way in a week. By then you should be well enough to travel. The offer was unexpected but seemed like providence. Still, Victoria hesitated. Why are you helping me so much, Mr. Porter, truly? Matthew was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of old memories. 6 years ago, I had a sister, Elena. She was forced to marry a man she didn't love, a powerful rancher who'd loaned my father money. I was away fighting Apaches with the cavalry. By the time I returned, his jaw tightened. She didn't survive the first year of marriage. They called it a fall from a horse. Victoria's hand went to her mouth. I'm so sorry. I've never forgiven myself for not being there to protect her, he said quietly. So when I saw you in that street yesterday, I couldn't just ride on by. Understanding bloomed between them. Victoria nodded slowly. Thank you for telling me. And yes, I would be very grateful for your recommendation to this Silver Creek Ranch. Relief visibly washed over Matthew's features. Good. Rest now. We can talk more when you're stronger. As he turned to leave, Victoria called after him. Mr. Porter, he paused in the doorway. Thank you for stopping the whip. His expression softened. Anyone worthy of being called a man would have done the same, Miss Everett. But they both knew that wasn't true. In a town full of people, only Matthew Porter had intervened. Over the next several days, Victoria regained her strength. The doctor visited twice more, expressing satisfaction with her healing. Martha Wilson proved to be a kind landlady, bringing meals and helping Victoria bathe without aggravating her injury. On the 4th day, Victoria finally managed to venture downstairs to the boarding house's small parlor. She wore a simple dress that Martha had altered from one of her own. Victoria's clothes were still at her father's ranch, and she had no intention of retrieving them. Matthew Porter sat in an armchair by the window, reading a newspaper. He stood when she entered, genuine pleasure lighting his face. Miss Everett, it's good to see you up and about. Please call me Victoria, she offered, settling carefully onto a sofa. After all you've done, formality seems unnecessary. Victoria, then, he agreed with a small smile. And I'm Matthew. An easy silence fell between them as Victoria gazed out the window at Hot Springs' busy Main Street. Carriages and riders passed by. Townspeople went about their business, all unaware of how dramatically her life had changed. Have you heard anything from your father? Matthew asked gently. Victoria shook her head. No, but I didn't expect to. When Charles Everett makes a declaration, he stands by it even to his detriment. And Blackstone, a shiver ran through her. Nothing directly, but Martha mentioned he's been asking around town about me, and about you. Matthew's expression hardened. I thought he might. You should know what kind of man he is, Victoria said. Jeremiah Blackstone came to Dakota Territory 10 years ago with nothing. Now he owns the largest cattle operation in the county, the bank, and half the businesses in town. People who oppose him tend to suffer misfortune. I've met men like him before, Matthew replied. They think money and power put them above the law. Victoria's hands twisted in her lap. He wanted to marry me because our ranch borders his northern pastures. The land has water rights he needs for expansion. She looked up, meeting Matthew's gaze. When my father first proposed the match 6 months ago, I refused. Then our cattle started dying mysteriously. Our hay barn burned. Suddenly, we couldn't get credit at the mercantile. Understanding dawned on Matthew's face. Your father was desperate. Yes, Victoria acknowledged. The ranch has been struggling since Mother died. When Blackstone offered to pay all our debts in exchange for my hand in marriage, Father saw it as the only way out. Matthew leaned forward. That doesn't excuse what he did to you. No, Victoria agreed softly. But I understand his desperation, if not his methods. Before Matthew could respond, the boarding house door opened with a bang. Heavy footsteps sounded in the hallway before Jeremiah Blackstone himself appeared in the parlor doorway. At 45, Blackstone cut an imposing figure. Tall and broad-shouldered, with silver threading his dark hair and beard, he dressed in fine clothes that set him apart from the working men of Hot Springs. His eyes, cold and calculating, fixed on Victoria before sliding to Matthew. So this is where you've been hiding, Blackstone said, his voice deceptively pleasant. Your father is beside himself with worry, Victoria. Matthew rose to his feet, positioning himself slightly in front of Victoria. Mr. Blackstone, I presume. Miss Everett isn't hiding, and I doubt her father is worried about anything except his finances. Blackstone's smile didn't reach his eyes. And you must be the heroic cowboy I've heard about. Interfering in family matters isn't wise in these parts, friend. I'm not your friend, Matthew replied evenly. And public beatings aren't family matters. Tension crackled in the air. Victoria stood, moving to Matthew's side despite the pain in her back. What do you want, Jeremiah? Blackstone spread his hands in a conciliatory gesture. Just to talk sense into you, my dear. Your father made a commitment. A man's word is his bond in these territories. My father doesn't speak for me, Victoria stated firmly. I never agreed to marry you. Perhaps not with words, Blackstone conceded, but by continuing to accept my assistance to your family's ranch, there was an implied agreement. Matthew's hand drifted toward his holster. That's not how agreements work, Blackstone. The cattle baron's eyes narrowed. Porter, isn't it? I asked around about you. Former cavalry, turned drifter. No roots, no real prospects. Just a small claim in the hills that probably won't amount to much. His gaze returned to Victoria. Is this the kind of man you're throwing your future away for? A saddle tramp with nothing to his name? Victoria straightened her spine despite the flash of pain. I'm not throwing away my future, I'm claiming it for myself. And Mr. Porter has shown more honor in one day than you have in all the years I've known you. Blackstone's pleasant facade cracked. You're making a mistake, girl. A woman alone doesn't last long out here without protection. She's not alone, Matthew stated quietly, the implied threat clear in his stance. For a long moment, the three of them stood in silent confrontation. Finally, Blackstone reached for his hat. Very well. But know this, Victoria, your father's ranch won't survive the month. I've called in his loans at the bank. His cold gaze shifted to Matthew. And you, Porter, Deadwood's a dangerous place. Accidents happen. Is that a threat? Matthew asked, his voice dangerously calm. Blackstone merely smiled. An observation. Good day to you both. After he departed, Victoria sank back onto the sofa, trembling slightly. He won't give up, she whispered. That's not his nature. Matthew sat beside her, his expression grim. Then we'll need to leave sooner than planned. Tomorrow, if the doctor agrees you're strong enough. Victoria nodded slowly. I hate feeling like I'm running away. It's not running away, Matthew countered. It's making a strategic retreat. Living well is the best revenge, Victoria. She looked at him, studying the determined set of his jaw and the kindness in his eyes. Why are you risking so much for me? Your silver mine is just a hole in the ground that might amount to something someday, he finished with a small smile. Some things matter more. Their gazes held for a long moment. Something unspoken passed between them, something neither was ready to acknowledge. Tomorrow, then, Victoria finally said. I don't have much to pack. Matthew nodded, his expression softening. I'll make the arrangements. Deadwood's about 2 days' ride from here. We'll take it easy for your sake. As he left to prepare for their journey, Victoria remained in the parlor, watching the afternoon sun cast long shadows across the floor. In less than a week, her entire life had been upended. She had lost her family and home, but perhaps gained something more valuable, her freedom, and the chance to build a life of her own choosing. And though she barely knew him, she couldn't help but wonder if Matthew Porter might somehow be part of that future. Dawn had barely broken when Victoria met Matthew at the stables behind the boarding house. She wore her borrowed dress and a shawl against the early morning chill. Her few possessions were bundled in a small carpet bag. Good morning, Matthew greeted her, leading a gentle-looking mare. This is Penny. She's steady and smooth-gaited, should be easier on your back. Victoria approached the horse, stroking her velvety nose. She's beautiful. Thank you for thinking of my comfort. Matthew's saddle bags were already secured on his chestnut stallion. We should get moving. I'd like to put some distance between us and town before Blackstone realizes we've gone. Martha Wilson appeared with a package wrapped in cloth. Biscuits and jerky for the trail, she explained, pressing it into Victoria's hands. And a bit of advice, Deadwood's a rough place for a young woman. Keep your wits about you. Victoria hugged the older woman. Thank you for everything, Martha. Think nothing of it, dear. Now go on before that Blackstone fellow comes sniffing around again. Matthew helped Victoria mount, careful of her healing back. Once she was settled, he swung easily into his own saddle. Ready? Victoria took one last look at Hot Springs, the town where she'd grown up. Somewhere on the outskirts was the Everett ranch, where her father was likely waking to begin another day of struggling against mounting debts. Despite everything, a pang of sadness touched her heart. I'm ready, she said firmly, turning Penny toward the north road. They rode steadily through the morning, following the winding trail that would eventually lead to Deadwood. The landscape gradually changed from the grassy plains around Hot Springs to more rugged terrain as they approached the Black Hills. Pine forests crowded the horizons, and rocky outcroppings punctuated the trail. Matthew kept them moving at a comfortable pace, frequently checking to ensure Victoria wasn't overtaxing herself. By midday, they stopped beside a clear stream to rest the horses and eat some of Martha's provisions. How's your back holding up? Matthew asked as Victoria eased herself down from the saddle. Better than I expected, she admitted, stretching carefully. Penny is indeed a gentle mount. They sat on sun-warmed rocks near the water's edge. Birds called from the trees and a gentle breeze rustled the pines. After the tension of recent days, the peaceful moment felt like a luxury. Tell me about this Silver Creek ranch, Victoria requested between bites of jerky. What sort of place is it? Matthew leaned back, crossing his ankles. It's a decent-sized cattle operation about 5 miles outside Deadwood. The owner, Joseph Bradley, is getting on in years. His wife died a decade ago and his son runs most of the daily operations now. And the position? What would be expected of me? Managing the household, mostly. Cooking for the ranch hands, keeping accounts, ordering supplies from town. Matthew glanced at her. Joseph mentioned they need someone who can help with the horses occasionally, said his last housekeeper was afraid of them. Victoria smiled for what felt like the first time in days. I'm certainly not afraid of horses. I broke my first wild Mustang when I was 16. Matthew's eyebrows rose in appreciation. That's no small feat. Father wanted a son, she explained with a small shrug. Instead, he got me. I was determined to prove I was just as capable as any boy would have been. From what I've seen, you succeeded, Matthew replied, his admiration evident. Victoria studied him curiously. You're different from most men I've met. You don't seem bothered by a woman who can ride and ranch like a man. Matthew brushed crumbs from his vest. My mother raised 3 boys on her own after my father died in the war. She could outride, outshoot, and outwork most men I've known, taught me to respect capability wherever I find it. She sounds remarkable. She was, Matthew agreed, a shadow crossing his features. Lost her to cholera 4 years ago, not long after my sister died. Victoria reached out impulsively, touching his arm. I'm sorry. It seems we've both known our share of loss. Their eyes met, and for a moment neither spoke. Something sparked between them, recognition of kindred spirits who understood grief and resilience. Matthew cleared his throat, breaking the moment. We should keep moving. There's a small way station about 4 hours ahead where we can spend the night. As they continued their journey, Victoria found herself studying Matthew's straight back and confident posture as he rode ahead of her. He was unlike any man she'd known, direct yet gentle, strong yet considerate. In the short time she'd known him, he had shown her more respect than she'd received from most men in her entire life. The afternoon passed pleasantly as they rode through increasingly beautiful country. Matthew pointed out landmarks and shared stories from his cavalry days. Victoria found herself laughing at his tale of a particularly stubborn mule that had once eaten his commanding officer's hat. By late afternoon, dark clouds began gathering on the horizon. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of rain. We need to pick up the pace, Matthew called over his shoulder. That storm looks mean. They urged their horses to a faster trot, but the weather moved more quickly than anticipated. Within an hour, fat raindrops began pelting them, quickly soaking through their clothes. Thunder rumbled ominously in the distance. The way station is still 2 miles ahead, Matthew shouted above the increasing downpour. There's an old trapper's cabin just off the trail. We'll shelter there until this passes. He led them off the main path and into a stand of pines. After several minutes of careful navigation through increasingly dense trees, a small log cabin came into view. It was crude but solid-looking, with a small covered area for the horses. They dismounted quickly. Matthew helped Victoria down, his hands strong and steady at her waist. For a brief moment, they stood close enough that she could feel the warmth of him despite their sodden clothes. Inside, he directed, breaking the spell. I'll see to the horses. Victoria pushed open the cabin door, finding it musty but dry inside. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, and rough-hewn furniture, a table, 2 chairs, and a narrow bed filled the single room. She quickly located a lantern and some matches, providing a warm glow against the darkening day. Matthew entered several minutes later, carrying their saddlebags and shaking water from his hat. Horses are settled. This storm's setting in for the night, I'm afraid. Victoria hugged her arms around herself, shivering slightly in her wet clothes. Matthew immediately set about building a fire, his efficient movements suggesting years of practice. Soon, a cheerful blaze crackled in the fireplace, pushing back the damp chill. You should change into something dry, he suggested, keeping his back politely turned as he rummaged through his own saddlebag. I'll step outside while you do. Victoria hesitated. Your clothes will be just as wet outside. Please just turn your back, I trust you. Something flickered in Matthew's eyes, gratitude, perhaps, at her confidence in his honor. He nodded once and faced the wall while Victoria quickly changed into her only other dress. The thin walls shuddered as wind and rain lashed at the cabin. "You can turn around now," she said when she was decent. "Your turn to change." Victoria busied herself laying out their wet things near the fire while Matthew changed into dry clothing. When she turned back, he was wearing a clean shirt and pants, his wet hair slicked back from his forehead. The firelight caught the angles of his face, highlighting the strong line of his jaw and the small scar above his right eyebrow. "Hungry?" he asked, producing a tin of beans and some hardtack from his supplies. They shared a simple meal in companionable silence, listening to the storm rage outside. As night fell completely, the small cabin felt increasingly intimate, just the two of them in a pool of firelight, while the rest of the world disappeared into darkness and rain. "We should reach Deadwood by tomorrow evening," Matthew said, breaking the long silence. "Joseph doesn't expect me for another few days, so your arrival will be a surprise." Victoria stared into the flames. "What if he doesn't want to hire me? What if I have nowhere to go?" Matthew's gaze was steady when she looked up. "Then we'll figure something else out." "I won't abandon you, Victoria." The sincerity in his voice sent an unexpected warmth through her chest. "Why?" she asked softly. "You've done more than enough. Why continue to help me?" Matthew was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was low and thoughtful. "At first, it was about Alina seeing in you what happened to my sister and wanting a different outcome. But now," he met her eyes directly, "now it's about you, your courage, your determination. You deserve the chance to build the life you want." Victoria swallowed against the sudden tightness in her throat. "No one has ever seen me that way before, as someone with choices of my own." "Then they weren't really seeing you at all," Matthew replied simply. The fire popped and hissed as a comfortable silence settled between them. Outside, the storm continued unabated, rain drumming on the cabin roof. "You should take the bed," Matthew said eventually, nodding toward the narrow cot. "I'll make do on the floor by the fire." Victoria glanced at the small bed, then back at him. "You're too tall for the floor." "We could share it properly, I mean, back to back." When his eyebrows rose, she added, "I trust you, Matthew, and it's hardly proper for either of us to sleep on the cold floor when there's a perfectly good bed." After a moment's hesitation, Matthew nodded, "If you're certain." They arranged themselves awkwardly on the narrow cot. A blanket from Matthew's pack spread over them both. Victoria lay on her side, facing the wall, acutely aware of the solid warmth of Matthew's back against hers. Despite the unusual circumstances, she felt surprisingly safe. "Good night, Victoria," Matthew said quietly. "Good night, Matthew," she whispered back, listening to the rain and his steady breathing until sleep claimed her. Victoria woke to pale sunlight filtering through the cabin's single window. For a disoriented moment, she couldn't recall where she was. Then she registered the warm presence beside her and remembered the storm, the cabin, Matthew. Sometime during the night, their positions had shifted. Matthew lay on his back, one arm extended, and Victoria had somehow migrated to rest her head against his shoulder. His other arm draped protectively across her waist. She remained still, listening to the steady rhythm of his heart beneath her ear. In sleep, his face was more relaxed, the lines of worry and vigilance smoothed away. A surge of tenderness caught her by surprise, followed by a flicker of guilt for watching him in such an unguarded moment. Victoria carefully began to extricate herself from his loose embrace. The movement woke him instantly, his blue eyes flying open, hand automatically reaching for the gun he'd placed beside the bed. "It's just me," she assured him quickly. "The storm has passed." Matthew relaxed, though a flush of color touched his cheeks when he realized how they'd been positioned. "Forgive me," he said, sitting up. "I didn't mean to. There's nothing to forgive." Victoria interrupted gently. "We both slept better for the warmth, I suspect." He nodded, seemingly relieved by her practical assessment. They prepared for the day's journey in companionable silence, gathering their now dry clothes and repacking their meager supplies. Outside, the world had been transformed by the night's storm. Droplets clung to pine needles, sparkling like diamonds in the morning sun. The air smelled clean and fresh, carrying the scent of wet earth and forest. The horses seemed eager to continue, well rested from their night under shelter. As Victoria mounted Penny, she noticed Matthew watching her with an unreadable expression. "Is something wrong?" she asked. He shook his head slightly. "No, just thinking how different you look today compared to when I first saw you in Hot Springs. There's more color in your face, more life in your eyes." Victoria hadn't considered how her appearance might have changed, but she knew her spirit felt lighter with each mile they put between themselves and her former life. "I feel different," she admitted. "Scared about what's ahead, but hopeful too." Matthew smiled, the expression warming his entire face. "Hope is good. Let's hold onto that." They made excellent time on the second day of their journey. The trail was muddy from the storm but passable, and the horses maintained a steady pace. By late afternoon, they crested a hill and looked down into a valley where the bustling town of Deadwood spread along a winding creek. Victoria caught her breath at the sight. Unlike the orderly streets of Hot Springs, Deadwood had grown organically. Buildings clustered haphazardly along the gulch. Mining operations dotted the surrounding hillsides, and smoke rose from countless chimneys. Even from a distance, the energy of the place was palpable, a town still in the throes of gold fever. "It's larger than I expected," she commented as they began their descent. "And rougher," Matthew warned. "Gold miners, gamblers, prospectors, all kinds come through Deadwood looking to strike it rich. The decent folk are outnumbered, though they're trying to civilize the place bit by bit." They rode directly through town, Victoria taking in the sights with wide eyes. Saloons outnumbered other businesses 3-1. Miners with dirt-streaked faces mingled with dandified gamblers on the boardwalks. A group of Chinese workers huddled outside a laundry, speaking rapidly in their own language. Two well-dressed women with painted faces called out invitations to Matthew from a second-story balcony, falling silent when they noticed Victoria riding beside him. "Silver Creek Ranch is just beyond town," Matthew explained as they left the main street behind. Joseph Bradley bought the land before the gold rush. Smartest move he ever made. Selling beef to hungry miners pays better than panning for gold. The landscape opened up as they followed a well-traveled road along a creek. After several miles, a large ranch came into view. Substantial outbuildings surrounded a 2-story main house built of sturdy logs. Cattle grazed in distant pastures, and a corral of horses perked up at their approach. A middle-aged man with a salt and pepper beard emerged from the barn as they rode into the yard. He raised a hand in greeting, his weathered face breaking into a smile of recognition. "Matthew Porter, you old son of a gun. Wasn't expecting you for days yet," he called out. Matthew dismounted, grinning as he clasped the man's hand. "Joseph Bradley, good to see you." "We made better time than expected." Joseph's curious gaze moved to Victoria, still mounted on Penny. "And who might this lovely lady be?" Matthew helped Victoria down from her horse with gentle hands. "Joseph, may I present Miss Victoria Everett." "Victoria, this is Joseph Bradley, owner of Silver Creek Ranch and one of the few men I'd trust with my life." Victoria extended her hand. "A pleasure to meet you, Mr. Bradley." Joseph shook her hand, his shrewd eyes taking in her borrowed dress and the fading marks on her wrists where her father had grabbed her. "Likewise, Miss Everett, Though I suspect there's quite a story behind your arrival. Matthew nodded. There is, and one I'd prefer to tell in private. Understanding passed between the two men. Of course. Come inside. Martha just made coffee, and my son Daniel should be back from town soon. The main house was surprisingly comfortable inside, with polished wooden floors covered by colorful rugs and substantial furniture built to last. A plump, cheerful woman introduced as Martha Bradley, Joseph's sister-in-law, fussed over Victoria and Matthew, insisting they sit at the large kitchen table while she served coffee and fresh baked bread with preserves. Once they were settled with steaming cups before them, Joseph leaned forward. Now, what brings you here with a young lady in tow, Matthew? Not your usual style. Matthew recounted the events in Hot Springs, keeping his tone matter-of-fact but omitting nothing important. Victoria was grateful that he didn't dramatize her situation or present her as a helpless victim. Joseph and Martha listened intently, their expressions darkening at the mention of Victoria's public beating. Disgraceful, Martha muttered. No father worthy of the name treats his daughter so. Joseph's gaze settled thoughtfully on Victoria. And you're looking for work, Miss Everett? Victoria straightened in her chair. Yes, sir. Matthew mentioned you need a housekeeper. I can cook, clean, keep accounts, and I'm good with horses. I'm not afraid of hard work. She ran her father's ranch for 5 years after her mother died, Matthew added. Knows more about cattle and horses than most cowboys I've met. Joseph exchanged a look with Martha, some unspoken communication passing between them. Well, our last housekeeper left us in a bind when she departed for Cheyenne. The position is yours if you want it, Miss Everett. Relief washed over Victoria. Thank you, Mr. Bradley. I won't let you down. Room and board plus $20 a month, Joseph offered. More than fair wages for these parts. Victoria nodded quickly. It was indeed generous and more independence than she'd ever had. There's a small cabin about 50 yards from the main house, Martha explained. It was built for the foreman, but he prefers staying in the bunkhouse with the other hands. It would give you privacy and still keep you close enough to manage the household. The Bradleys' easy acceptance and generous offer brought unexpected tears to Victoria's eyes. I'm very grateful, she managed. Matthew smiled, clearly pleased with the arrangement. Joseph always was a good judge of character. The sound of horse hooves and wagon wheels interrupted their conversation. Minutes later, the kitchen door opened, and a tall young man entered. He resembled Joseph, though his beard was darker and his build more muscular. His eyes widened slightly at the sight of visitors. Daniel, Joseph greeted his son. Come meet Matthew's friend, Miss Victoria Everett. She'll be taking over for Mrs. Holloway. Daniel Bradley removed his hat, revealing tousled dark hair. He nodded politely to Victoria. Welcome to Silver Creek, Miss Everett. His gaze shifted to Matthew and his expression brightened. Porter didn't expect you for another week at least. The two men clasped hands warmly. Plans changed, Matthew explained simply. Martha rose briskly. Daniel, wash up. Dinner's nearly ready. Matthew and Miss Everett will be joining us, of course. She turned to Victoria. You must be exhausted from your journey. After dinner, I'll show you to the cabin and get you settled. Victoria helped Martha prepare the meal, grateful for the chance to prove her usefulness immediately. The Bradley kitchen was well stocked and organized, making it easy to find what she needed. By the time they all gathered around the large dining table, Victoria had begun to feel less like an intruder and more like a welcome addition. Conversation flowed easily during dinner. Joseph and Daniel discussed ranch business while Martha inquired delicately about Victoria's background. Matthew remained mostly quiet, occasionally contributing a comment or answering a direct question. Victoria couldn't help noticing how often his gaze found her across the table, his blue eyes warm with something that made her heart beat faster. Each time their eyes met, a small, private smile would touch his lips before he looked away. After dinner, true to her word, Martha showed Victoria to the small cabin that would be her new home. It was a simple one-room structure with a stone fireplace, a bed with a colorful quilt, a small table with 2 chairs, and a chest of drawers. A shelf held several books, a luxury Victoria hadn't expected. "It's not much," Martha apologized, "but it's private and clean. The pump outside brings up good water, and there's a small garden plot if you're of a mind to grow some vegetables." Victoria turned in a slow circle, taking in the modest space. After the chaos and uncertainty of the past week, the cabin represented something she'd never truly had before: independence. "It's perfect," she said sincerely. "Thank you, Mrs. Bradley." "Martha, please," the older woman insisted. "We're informal here at Silver Creek." She hesitated, then added, "I don't mean to pry, but you and Matthew," Victoria felt heat rise to her cheeks. "We're friends. He helped me when no one else would." Martha's eyes were kind but knowing. "I've known that boy since he was knee-high to a grasshopper. Never seen him look at anyone the way he looks at you." Before Victoria could formulate a response, a knock sounded at the open door. Matthew stood there, holding her small carpet bag. "Your belongings," he explained, stepping inside and placing the bag on the bed. "Such as they are." Martha excused herself with a meaningful glance at Victoria. "I'll leave you two to say your goodbyes. Matthew, you're staying in the guest room in the main house, of course." When they were alone, an awkward silence fell. Victoria busied herself unpacking her few possessions, aware of Matthew watching her from near the doorway. "Will you be comfortable here?" he asked finally. Victoria smiled, placing her mother's small silver hand mirror on the chest of drawers, the only keepsake she'd brought from her old life. "Very much so. The Bradleys are kind people." "The kindest I know," Matthew agreed. He shifted his weight, seeming uncharacteristically hesitant. "Victoria, I need to ride out tomorrow. The silver mine needs attention, and I've already delayed longer than I should have." Though she'd known this moment would come, disappointment still bloomed in Victoria's chest. "Of course. You've done more than enough for me already." "The mine's only about 3 hours' ride from here," he continued quickly. "I'll be back in a week or so to check on you, if that's all right." Hope replaced disappointment. "I'd like that." Matthew took a step toward her, then seemed to think better of it. "You'll be safe here. Joseph and Daniel are good men. The ranch hands respect the Bradley name, and no one from Hot Springs is likely to find you." Victoria nodded, suddenly unsure what to say. In such a short time, this man had become important to her in ways she couldn't fully articulate. "Thank you," she said simply. "For everything." Matthew's eyes softened. "You don't need to thank me, Victoria. Just be well, be happy." He reached for his hat, which he'd been turning nervously in his hands. "Good night." "Good night, Matthew," she replied, watching as he stepped out into the gathering dusk. Through the small window, she observed his tall figure walking toward the main house, shoulders straight and stride purposeful. Only when he disappeared from view did Victoria realize she was clutching her mother's mirror tightly against her heart. Victoria adapted quickly to life at Silver Creek Ranch. Martha spent the first few days showing her the routine: when meals were expected, which ranch hands had dietary preferences or restrictions, how Joseph liked his shirts pressed. The work was demanding but satisfying, allowing Victoria to prove her capabilities while establishing her place in the ranch hierarchy. The Bradley men were fair employers who treated her with consistent respect. Daniel, in particular, seemed impressed by her knowledge of ranch operations. When she mentioned her experience with horses, he invited her to help train a spirited mare that had resisted his efforts. "Never seen anything like it," he told his father afterward. "Miss Everett just spoke to that horse like they shared a language, had her taking a saddle within an hour." Victoria's skill with the horses led to an expansion of her duties. In addition to managing the household, she began spending mornings in the stables, working with problematic mounts or helping break the younger stock. The extra responsibility came with a $5 increase in her monthly wages money she saved carefully in a tin box beneath a loose floorboard in her cabin. Each night, she fell into bed pleasantly exhausted, but satisfied with her new life. The nightmares of her father's whip and Blackstone's cold eyes gradually faded, replaced by dreamless sleep or occasionally, dreams of blue eyes and a gentle voice. Matthew didn't return after a week as promised. 2 weeks passed, then 3, with no word. Victoria tried not to show her disappointment, focusing instead on her growing responsibilities at the ranch. But each evening, she found herself glancing down the road, hoping to see a familiar chestnut stallion approaching. "Mining's unpredictable business," Joseph explained when he noticed her watching the road one evening. "Matthew's claim showed promise last time I visited. Might be he struck a good vein and is too busy pulling silver out of the ground to ride back here." Victoria nodded, accepting the explanation while trying to ignore the small voice inside that whispered maybe he had simply moved on, his obligation to her fulfilled. Late one afternoon in her 4th week at Silver Creek, Victoria was returning from town with supplies when she spotted a rider approaching from the direction of Deadwood. Her heart leaped before she could temper her reaction. Even at a distance, she recognized Matthew's distinctive posture in the saddle. She reined in her wagon, waiting as he drew near. When he was close enough for her to see his face, Victoria's smile faltered. Matthew looked different, thinner, with several days' worth of beard darkening his jaw and shadows beneath his eyes. "Victoria," he greeted her, his voice warm despite his haggard appearance. "You're a sight for sore eyes." "You look terrible," she blurted before she could stop herself. "Are you ill?" A ghost of his usual smile touched his lips. "Just tired. The mine's been challenging." He dismounted stiffly, coming to stand beside her wagon. Up close, Victoria could see a healing cut along his temple and bruised knuckles. "You've been fighting," she observed quietly. Matthew's expression closed slightly. "Had some trouble with claim jumpers, nothing to worry about." Victoria's concern deepened. "Joseph said the mine was producing well." "It is. That's why others have taken an interest." His tone made it clear he didn't wish to discuss the matter further. Instead, he gestured to her wagon. "Supplies from town," Victoria nodded, accepting the change of subject. "Martha needed flour and coffee, and I picked up fabric for new curtains in the main house." They fell into step together, Matthew leading his horse alongside Victoria's wagon as they continued toward the ranch. After a moment of silence, he asked, "How are you finding life at Silver Creek?" "Wonderful," Victoria answered honestly. "The Bradleys are good people. I'm even working with the horses now, not just managing the household." Matthew's expression lightened. "I thought you might. Joseph mentioned in his last letter that you have a way with the difficult ones." The knowledge that Matthew had inquired about her warmed Victoria's heart. "You wrote to Joseph about me. I wanted to be sure you were settling in well," he admitted. "When things at the mine kept me from returning as promised." They reached the ranch yard, where Daniel emerged from the barn to greet them. He and Matthew clasped hands warmly before Daniel helped unload the supplies from Victoria's wagon. "You're staying for dinner, of course," Victoria told Matthew, making it more statement than question. His tired eyes crinkled at the corners. "Wouldn't miss it." Dinner that evening was a lively affair. Matthew's return seemed to brighten the atmosphere around the table. He shared sanitized stories from the mining camp, carefully edited to exclude any mention of the trouble Victoria had glimpsed evidence of earlier. Joseph and Daniel updated him on ranch business, while Martha proudly described how Victoria had reorganized the pantry and kitchen for greater efficiency. "And she makes a finer apple pie than I ever did," Martha added, patting Victoria's hand affectionately. "Joseph has had 3 slices every night since she first baked one." The older man harumphed good-naturedly. "A man's entitled to enjoy good cooking." Victoria basked in the warm approval, occasionally catching Matthew watching her with an expression that made her cheeks flush. Despite his obvious fatigue, his eyes remained alert and appreciative whenever they rested on her. After dinner, while Martha and Victoria cleared the table, Joseph pulled Matthew aside for what appeared to be a serious conversation. They spoke in low tones near the fireplace, their expressions grave. "Trouble at the mine is worse than he's letting on," Martha murmured, noticing Victoria's concerned glance toward the men. "Joseph's worried." Victoria bit her lip. "He looks exhausted." "More than that," Martha replied. "He looks hunted." Before Victoria could ask what she meant, the men rejoined them. Matthew made a visible effort to appear more cheerful, complimenting Victoria on the meal and asking about her plans for the garden plot beside her cabin. When the evening drew to a close, Matthew walked Victoria back to her cabin. The night was clear, stars scattered like diamond dust across the vast Dakota sky. Their footsteps crunched on the gravel path, the only sound in the peaceful darkness. "I meant to return sooner," Matthew said when they reached her door. "I hope you didn't think I'd forgotten." Victoria shook her head. "I knew you had responsibilities at the mine. Still." His eyes searched hers in the dim light spilling from her cabin window. "I gave my word." "And now you're here," she said simply. "Though I suspect not for long." Matthew sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I need to return tomorrow. Things are complicated at the moment." Victoria gathered her courage. "Those men you fought with, were they just claim jumpers, or is there more to it?" For a moment, she thought he might deflect again. Instead, he leaned against the porch post, suddenly looking every bit as tired as he clearly felt. "Blackstone has connections in Deadwood," he admitted quietly. "Mining interests, investments in some of the larger operations. After we left Hot Springs, he made inquiries, found out about my claim." Victoria's blood ran cold. "He sent men after you because of me." "Because I interfered with his plans," Matthew corrected firmly. "Don't take that guilt on yourself, Victoria. Blackstone is the type of man who can't stand being thwarted. He would have come after me regardless." "How serious is it?" she asked, dreading the answer. Matthew's eyes met hers directly. "Serious enough that I've hired additional men to guard the mine. Serious enough that Joseph has offered to buy my share to get me clear of the situation." "Will you sell?" He was quiet for a long moment. "I haven't decided. The claim is valuable, more valuable than I initially thought. Could set me up for years, maybe let me buy a small spread of my own." His gaze grew distant. "I've been drifting since Alina died, since I left the cavalry. Might be time to put down roots." Victoria's heart fluttered at the implications. "Here, near Deadwood, maybe." His eyes focused on her again, intensity replacing the distance. "Depends on what's worth staying for." The air between them seemed to thicken. Victoria was acutely aware of his proximity, of the way the moonlight silvered his hair and softened the tired lines of his face. "Matthew," she began, uncertain what she meant to say. He straightened, breaking the moment. "It's late. You must be tired." He touched the brim of his hat. "Good night, Victoria. I'll see you before I leave tomorrow." Though disappointed by his retreat, Victoria understood. Whatever was growing between them was still fragile, complicated by the dangers surrounding him and her own recent escape from an unwanted marriage. "Good night," she replied. "Rest well." She watched him walk back toward the main house, his shoulders squared despite his obvious fatigue. Only when he disappeared into the darkness did Victoria enter her cabin, her mind troubled by this new knowledge of Blackstone's far-reaching influence. The next morning, Victoria woke early to prepare a special breakfast. If Matthew was leaving again, she wanted to ensure he had a proper meal first. She was mixing batter for hot cakes when Martha entered the kitchen, eyebrows rising at the spread Victoria had already prepared. My, the older woman commented with a knowing smile. Someone's eager to impress. Victoria felt her cheeks warm. He's been living on miner's fare for weeks. A good meal before he returns can't hurt. Martha simply nodded, her eyes twinkling as she began brewing coffee. Together, they prepared a breakfast fit for a special occasion: hot cakes with maple syrup, thick slices of ham, scrambled eggs with herbs from the kitchen garden, and fresh baked biscuits. Joseph and Daniel appeared first, both men eyeing the feast with appreciation. Matthew joined them shortly afterward, looking marginally better after a night in a proper bed. His eyes widened at the sight of the table. "This is quite a send-off," he commented, taking a seat. "Thank you." Breakfast passed pleasantly, though Victoria noticed Matthew ate less than she'd hoped. His mind seemed elsewhere, his contributions to the conversation perfunctory at best. After the meal, Joseph drew Matthew into his study to conclude whatever business they had discussed the night before. Victoria busied herself with kitchen cleanup, trying not to feel disappointed at the limited time she'd had with Matthew before his departure. Nearly an hour later, she was hanging laundry behind the house when Matthew found her. He'd already saddled his horse, clearly ready to leave. "I wanted to say goodbye properly," he explained, removing his hat, "and to thank you for breakfast. It was the finest meal I've had in weeks." Victoria smoothed her apron. "You're welcome. I wanted to make sure you had something substantial before returning to the mine." Matthew stepped closer, his expression serious. "Victoria, I need to ask something of you. Be extra vigilant while I'm gone. Don't go into town alone and don't tell anyone where you came from." Concern tightened her chest. "You think Blackstone might find me here?" "I think he's a man with long reach and a longer memory." Matthew's hands clenched and unclenched at his sides. "I'd never forgive myself if something happened to you because of me." Victoria straightened her spine. "Nothing will happen. The Bradleys wouldn't allow it. And I'm not the same frightened girl from Hot Springs anymore." A small smile touched his lips. "No, you certainly aren't." His expression grew serious again. "Still, promise me you'll be careful." "I promise," she assured him. "And you must promise the same. Those claim jumpers sound dangerous." Matthew nodded. "I'll be back as soon as I can. 2 weeks at the most. Joseph and I have made arrangements that should resolve the situation." Before Victoria could ask what arrangements, Matthew suddenly reached for her hand. His calloused fingers closed gently around hers, the touch sending warmth up her arm. "I find myself thinking about you at the oddest moments," he admitted quietly. "When I'm checking the support beams in the mine shaft, or counting the days take, or just watching the sunset from my tent. I think about your courage that day in Hot Springs, and how you never broke despite everything." Victoria's breath caught. "I think about you too," she confessed. "Every evening when I look down the road, every time Daniel mentions something about mining, every time I hear hoofbeats approaching the ranch." Matthew's eyes darkened. With deliberate slowness, he raised her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. "Remember that while I'm gone." The gesture was so unexpectedly tender that Victoria felt tears spring to her eyes. I will. He released her hand reluctantly, replacing his hat. 2 weeks, he promised again. Take care of yourself, Victoria, and you, Matthew. She watched him mount and ride away, raising her hand in farewell when he turned in the saddle for one last look. Only when he disappeared over the distant rise did Victoria realize that Martha stood in the kitchen doorway, having witnessed the entire exchange. Well, the older woman said with satisfaction, I'd say that's promising. Victoria touched her knuckles, still feeling the imprint of Matthew's lips. Yes, she agreed softly. I believe it is. The days following Matthew's departure passed in a blur of routine work and quiet anticipation. Victoria threw herself into her duties at the ranch, earning increasing respect from the hands and affection from the Bradleys. She even accompanied Daniel on a 2-day cattle drive to move a herd to fresh pasture, proving herself as capable in the saddle as any cowboy. True to her promise, she remained vigilant, never venturing into town alone and always keeping watch for unfamiliar faces around the ranch. Joseph seemed to share her caution, instructing the hands to report any strangers in the vicinity immediately. 12 days after Matthew's departure, Victoria was returning from the chicken coop with a basket of fresh eggs when she noticed a rider approaching from the direction of Deadwood. Her heart leaped before she recognized that it wasn't Matthew but a young boy of perhaps 14, riding a lathered horse at a dangerous pace. She set down her basket and hurried to meet him as he reined in at the ranch yard. Whoa there! What's the rush, young man? The boy, red-faced and breathing hard, fumbled in his pocket. Message for Mr. Bradley, from Deadwood. They said it's urgent. Victoria called for Joseph, who emerged from the barn at her shout. He took the folded paper from the boy, tipping him a coin before reading the message. His face paled visibly. What is it? Victoria asked, dread pooling in her stomach. Is it Matthew? Joseph looked up, his expression grim. There's been trouble at the mine, a cave-in. Matthew's been hurt. Victoria's world tilted. How badly, doesn't say. Just that he's at Doc Simmons' place in Deadwood and asking for me. Joseph was already striding toward the stable. Daniel, saddle my horse, Victoria followed, her mind racing. I'm coming with you. Joseph paused, studying her determined face. After a moment, he nodded. Have Martha pack some supplies. Doc Simmons is a good physician, but his place isn't exactly comfortable for recovery. Within 20 minutes, Victoria and Joseph were galloping toward Deadwood, leading a pack horse loaded with medical supplies, clean bandages, and food. The journey seemed interminable, each mile stretching Victoria's nerves tighter. Deadwood was as chaotic as she remembered, the streets bustling with miners, gamblers, and merchants. Joseph led her directly to a small building on a side street, a discreet sign identifying it as the office of H. Simmons, M.D. The doctor himself met them at the door, a bespectacled man with kind eyes and a harried expression. Joseph, thank goodness. I was beginning to think my message hadn't reached you. How is he? Joseph demanded, helping Victoria dismount. Dr. Simmons glanced at Victoria questioningly. Miss Everett works for me, Joseph explained briefly. She and Matthew are friends. The doctor nodded in understanding. He's stable now. 3 broken ribs, a dislocated shoulder, and a nasty gash on his leg that required stitches. He was trapped under debris for several hours before they got him out. Victoria's hand flew to her mouth. But he'll recover fully, with proper rest and care, yes. Dr. Simmons led them inside to a small room where Matthew lay on a narrow bed. Victoria's heart clenched at the sight of him. His face was pale beneath several days' growth of beard, a dark bruise mottling one cheek. His left arm was bound tightly to his chest, immobilizing the injured shoulder. Even in sleep, his expression was tight with pain. "He's been asking for you, Joseph," the doctor said quietly. "Something about papers needing signatures before it's too late." Joseph nodded grimly. "The mine sale. We'd agreed on terms, but nothing was finalized." At the sound of their voices, Matthew stirred. His eyes opened slowly, focusing first on Joseph, then widening when they found Victoria. "You shouldn't be here," he rasped, trying unsuccessfully to sit up. "Not safe." Victoria moved to his side, gently restraining him. "Lie still. We've brought supplies to make you more comfortable." Joseph approached the bed. "What happened, Matthew?" "Your men said the shaft supports gave way without warning." Matthew's jaw tightened. "Because someone saw it halfway through them. This wasn't an accident, Joseph." Victoria exchanged an alarmed look with Joseph. "Blackstone," she whispered. "Can't prove it," Matthew replied, wincing as he shifted position. "But 3 of my men were killed. Good men with families." Joseph's expression hardened. "Then we complete the sale immediately, get you clear of this mess." "No." Matthew's voice strengthened with determination. "I won't be bullied into selling. Not anymore." "This isn't about pride," Joseph argued. "It's about staying alive. We agreed." "That was before Jennings, Miller, and Tompkins died in that shaft," Matthew interrupted. "I owe their families justice, not a retreat." Victoria listened to their exchange with growing concern. "What exactly is happening? Please, I need to understand." Matthew sighed, then grimaced at the pain the movement caused his ribs. "After we left Hot Springs, Blackstone started making inquiries about me. When he discovered I owned a silver mine near Deadwood, he saw an opportunity. He made an offer through intermediaries insultingly low. When I refused, accidents began happening at the mine." "So you agreed to sell to Joseph instead," Victoria concluded. Matthew nodded. "At a fair price. But now—" His eyes hardened. "Now it's not just about the mine, it's about those men who died." Dr. Simmons cleared his throat. "Whatever you decide, Mr. Porter needs rest. He lost a significant amount of blood and those ribs need time to heal." "He can recover at Silver Creek," Victoria stated firmly. "It's safer and we can care for him properly there." Joseph nodded in agreement. "Can he be moved, doctor?" "Not ideally, but—" Dr. Simmons glanced out the window toward the crowded street. "Perhaps it would be safer. I'll prepare a sedative for the journey." While the doctor gathered medications, Joseph and Victoria conferred quietly. "I'll send Daniel and 2 of our best hands to guard the mine," Joseph decided. "And I'll speak with Sheriff Miller about investigating the cave improperly." "What about Matthew?" Victoria asked. "He's not going to give up easily." Joseph's expression was grim. "No, he isn't. Stubborn as a mule, always has been. But he's in no condition to fight this battle right now." Once Matthew was sedated for the journey, Joseph arranged for a wagon with a mattress in the back. The trip to Silver Creek was slow and careful, with Victoria riding in the wagon beside Matthew, monitoring his breathing and adjusting his position when necessary to minimize his pain. By the time they reached the ranch, night had fallen. With help from 2 ranch hands, they settled Matthew in the main house guest room, where Martha immediately took charge of his care. "You've done enough for today," she told Victoria gently. "Get some rest. I'll watch over him tonight." Exhausted but reluctant to leave Matthew's side, Victoria finally agreed. She returned to her cabin, washed the dust of travel from her face and hands, and changed into a clean dress before lying down on her bed. Despite her fatigue, sleep proved elusive as her mind replayed the day's events. Blackstone's vindictiveness had followed them all the way to Deadwood, threatening not just Matthew's livelihood but his life. The realization that her past continued to endanger him filled Victoria with a mixture of guilt and determination. Something needed to be done, but what? When dawn broke, Victoria returned to the main house to find Matthew awake but feverish. The doctor had warned this might happen, a result of the infected gash on his leg. Cold compresses, Martha directed, demonstrating how to gently bathe his forehead. And he needs to drink whenever possible. For 2 days, Victoria barely left Matthew's side, bathing his fevered skin, coaxing water between his parched lips, and changing the bandages on his leg wound. When delirium took him, she held his hand through the worst of it, listening as he called out names she didn't recognize, fellow soldiers from his cavalry days, perhaps, or the miners lost in the cave-in. Once, he called out for Alina, his voice breaking on his dead sister's name. Victoria's heart ached for him as she wiped tears from his unconscious face. On the 3rd night, his fever finally broke. Victoria, dozing in a chair beside his bed, woke to find him watching her through clear, lucid eyes. "You're still here," he murmured, his voice hoarse but stronger than it had been. Victoria blinked away sleep, straightening in her chair. "Where else would I be?" A ghost of his usual smile touched his lips. "Running as far from all this trouble as possible would be the sensible choice." "I've never claimed to be sensible," she replied, reaching for the water glass on the bedside table. "Here, drink." She supported his head as he sipped, acutely aware of the intimate nature of the gesture. When he'd finished, she helped him settle back against the pillows. "How long have I been here?" he asked. 3 days. Your fever finally broke tonight." Victoria smoothed the blanket over him. "Dr. Simmons rode out yesterday to check on you. He says the infection is clearing, but you need to remain in bed for at least another week." Matthew grimaced. A week of Martha's fussing might be worse than the cave-in. Victoria smiled, relieved to see glimpses of his usual spirit returning. "She means well, and she makes an excellent chicken soup." His expression sobered. "Victoria, about what happened at the mine, not now," she interrupted gently. "You need to focus on healing. Joseph has sent men to secure the mine, and he's speaking with the sheriff about investigating the cave-in properly." "And Blackstone," Victoria hesitated. "No word, but Joseph has men watching the roads to the ranch, just in case." Matthew's hand found hers on the bed covers. "I'm sorry for bringing this trouble to your doorstep. Again." "You didn't bring anything," Victoria corrected firmly. "Jeremiah Blackstone is responsible for his own actions, not you, and certainly not me." His fingers tightened around hers. "When I was trapped in that shaft, thinking I might die there in the darkness," he paused, swallowing hard. "All I could think about was that I might never see you again, never tell you." Victoria's heart pounded as she leaned closer. "Tell me what?" Matthew's eyes, blue and earnest even in the dim lamplight, held hers. "That somewhere between Hot Springs and Silver Creek, I fell in love with you, Victoria Everett." Joy bloomed in Victoria's chest, bright and unexpected. "Matthew, you don't need to say anything," he hurried on. "It's not fair to put this on you with everything that's happened. I just needed you to know, in case—" Victoria silenced him by pressing her fingers gently to his lips. "I love you too," she said simply. "I think I began falling the moment you stopped my father's whip in Hot Springs." Wonder transformed Matthew's face, erasing lines of pain and worry. Carefully, mindful of his injured ribs, Victoria leaned down and replaced her fingers with her lips, kissing him softly. The kiss was brief but perfect, a promise, a beginning. When she pulled back, Matthew's eyes remained closed for a moment, as if savoring the sensation. "Now you definitely have to get better," Victoria whispered, "because we have much more of that to look forward to." His eyes opened, a smile spreading across his face. "Yes, madam." True to the doctor's prediction, Matthew's recovery progressed steadily over the next week. His strength returned gradually, allowing him to move from bed to chair and eventually to take short, careful walks around the house with Victoria's support. During this time of enforced inactivity, they talked for hours, sharing stories of their childhoods, their hopes for the future, their fears and dreams. Victoria found herself falling more deeply in love with the man behind the heroic cowboy who had rescued her in Hot Springs. He was more complicated than she'd initially realized, thoughtful and well-read despite his frontier upbringing, haunted by his wartime experiences with the cavalry, driven by a strong sense of justice that sometimes overrode his self-preservation instincts. He made her laugh with tales of his misspent youth, and his quiet, unwavering support made her feel stronger than she'd ever believed possible. 2 weeks after Matthew's arrival at Silver Creek, Daniel returned from Deadwood with news. Sheriff Miller investigated the cave-in, he reported to his father, Matthew, and Victoria as they sat on the front porch enjoying the evening breeze. Found clear evidence of sabotage, just as Matthew suspected. The support beams were partially sawed through. Any leads on who did it? Joseph asked. Daniel shook his head. Nothing concrete, but there's more. Blackstone himself arrived in Deadwood 3 days ago. He's staying at the Grand Hotel and making no secret of his interest in buying mining properties. Victoria felt Matthew tense beside her. His hand, which had been holding hers, tightened almost painfully. He's getting bolder, Matthew observed grimly. Coming personally instead of working through intermediaries. There's something else, Daniel added hesitantly. He's been asking questions about Silver Creek Ranch. Specifically, whether we've taken on any new female employees recently. A chill ran down Victoria's spine. He knows I'm here. Joseph's expression hardened. Let him come. This is my land and I decide who stays on it. No, Matthew said firmly. I won't put your family or your ranch at risk, Joseph. This is my fight. And mine, Victoria added. Blackstone began this pursuit because of me, because I refused to be sold into marriage to secure my father's debts. Then we face him together, Matthew declared. But not here. Not at Silver Creek. Joseph frowned. What are you suggesting? I'm well enough to travel, Matthew replied. Victoria and I will return to Deadwood tomorrow. If Blackstone wants a confrontation, better it happen there where Sheriff Miller can intervene if necessary. It's too dangerous, Victoria protested. You're still recovering. Matthew's eyes met hers, determination clear in their blue depths. Running and hiding won't end this, Victoria. Blackstone won't stop until he gets what he wants or is convinced it's not worth pursuing. Matthew's right, Joseph said reluctantly. Blackstone isn't the type to give up. Better to confront him directly than wait for him to make another move. Victoria recognized the logic, even as fear clutched at her heart. Then I'm coming with you. I wouldn't have it any other way, Matthew assured her. This concerns both of us. That evening, Victoria returned to her cabin to pack a small bag for their journey to Deadwood. As she folded a clean dress, a knock sounded at her door. Expecting Matthew, she was surprised to find Martha standing there, a small package in her hands. May I come in, dear? The older woman asked. Victoria welcomed her, curious about her serious expression. I've watched you and Matthew these past weeks, Martha began, settling into one of the cabin's 2 chairs. The way you care for each other, the way you look at one another when you think no one notices. Heat rose to Victoria's cheeks. Is it that obvious? Martha smiled knowingly. Only to someone who remembers what new love looks like. Her expression sobered. You're facing something dangerous tomorrow. I want you to take this. She handed Victoria the small package. Unwrapping it, Victoria found a Derringer pistol, small enough to fit in a lady's reticule but deadly at close range. It was my sister's, Joseph's wife, Martha explained. She carried it for protection in the early days, when the territory was even wilder than it is now. Victoria ran a finger over the engraved handle. "I've never used a firearm. It's simple enough," Martha replied, demonstrating how to load and fire it. "I pray you won't need it, but a woman should never be defenseless, especially not when facing a man like Blackstone." Victoria carefully tucked the weapon into her bag. "Thank you, Martha, for this and for everything else. You've made me feel at home here." The older woman patted her hand. "You are home here, Victoria. No matter what happens tomorrow, remember you have a place at Silver Creek." Early the next morning, Victoria met Matthew at the stables. He moved more stiffly than usual, clearly still in pain from his injuries, but his determination was evident in every line of his body. "Are you certain you're strong enough for this?" she asked as he saddled his horse. Matthew straightened, wincing slightly as the movement pulled at his healing ribs. Strong enough, and tired of running from Blackstone's shadows. Joseph provided them with fresh horses and supplies for the journey. As they prepared to depart, he pressed something into Matthew's hand, a folded document. "The deed to your mine," Joseph explained. "Signed over to you free and clear. I was holding it as collateral against the loan for equipment, but consider that debt paid by the silver you've already extracted." Matthew stared at the paper. "Joseph, I can't accept." "You can and you will," Joseph interrupted firmly. "That mine is rightfully yours, Matthew. Fight for it." With gratitude in his eyes, Matthew tucked the deed securely inside his vest. He and Victoria mounted their horses, saying their goodbyes to the Bradleys with promises to return when the situation was resolved. The ride to Deadwood took longer than usual, as they traveled at a pace that wouldn't aggravate Matthew's injuries. They arrived in the bustling mining town by mid-afternoon, the streets crowded with the usual mix of miners, merchants, and those hoping to profit from both. Matthew led them directly to Sheriff Miller's office, a small building off the main street, distinguished by the tin star nailed beside the door. The sheriff himself sat behind a desk, a weathered man in his 50s with shrewd eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. He looked up as they entered, recognition lighting his face. "Porter, heard you were recovering at Silver Creek. Those ribs healing up?" "Well enough," Matthew replied, removing his hat. "Sheriff, this is Miss Victoria Everett." Miller nodded politely to Victoria before returning his attention to Matthew. "I reckon you're here about Blackstone." "You reckon right. Daniel said you found evidence of sabotage at the mine." The sheriff leaned back in his chair. "Saw it myself. Someone took a saw to those support beams, no question. Problem is, can't prove who did the sawing." "We both know who ordered it done," Matthew said grimly. Miller sighed. "Knowing and proving are different animals, Porter. Blackstone's got money and influence, and no direct connection to the sabotage." "What about the men who died?" Victoria asked. "Doesn't their loss demand justice?" The sheriff's expression softened slightly. "Yes, madam, it does, but justice needs evidence to stand on." He focused on Matthew again. "Word is, Blackstone's taking meetings at the Grand Hotel, making offers on mining claims throughout the area, and asking questions about Silver Creek Ranch," Matthew added. Miller nodded. "He's been asking about you too, Porter, and a young woman who might be in your company." His gaze shifted meaningfully to Victoria. "Then he knows we're both here," she concluded. "I'd say that's a safe bet." The sheriff stood. "Look, I can't arrest the man for asking questions or making business offers, but I can keep an eye on things. If you're planning a confrontation, I'd appreciate it happening somewhere public. Less chance of gunplay that way." Matthew considered this advice. "The Grand Hotel dining room, 7 o'clock this evening. Blackstone takes his meals there, according to Daniel." Miller nodded approvingly. I'll make sure a deputy or two are nearby, just in case. They took rooms at a small hotel several blocks from the Grand, choosing a modest establishment where they were less likely to be noticed. Victoria insisted on a room adjoining Matthew's, concerned about his still healing injuries. As evening approached, Victoria changed into her best dress, a deep green cotton that Martha had helped her alter to fit properly. She arranged her copper hair carefully, wanting to present a confident, composed appearance for their confrontation with Blackstone. There was a soft knock at the connecting door. "Victoria, are you ready?" She opened it to find Matthew similarly prepared for the evening. He'd shaved his trail beard and donned a clean shirt and vest. Despite the lingering shadows under his eyes from his recent ordeal, he looked handsome and formidable. His eyes widened slightly at the sight of her. "You look beautiful," he said simply. Victoria smiled, touching his freshly shaved cheek. "And you look much more like yourself." His hand caught hers, pressing a kiss to her palm. "Whatever happens tonight, remember this: you owe Blackstone nothing. Not explanations, not apologies, nothing." "I know," she assured him, "and neither do you." The Grand Hotel was Deadwood's attempt at Eastern elegance, a 3-story building with actual glass windows and a painted sign. Inside, the lobby featured carpeted floors and a grand staircase. The dining room, separated from the lobby by etched glass doors, catered to the town's wealthier citizens and visitors. Matthew offered Victoria his arm as they entered, his posture straight despite the pain she knew he still felt from his injuries. Heads turned as they made their way to a table, curious glances following their progress across the room. Victoria spotted Jeremiah Blackstone immediately. He sat at a prime table near the center of the room, dining with 2 expensively dressed men she didn't recognize. When Blackstone's cold eyes found them, a smile that didn't reach those eyes spread across his face. "Porter," he called loudly enough to be heard throughout the room. "And Miss Everett, what a pleasant surprise." Conversations hushed as diners sensed the tension between the new arrivals and the wealthy cattle baron. Matthew guided Victoria directly to Blackstone's table, stopping just short of it. "Blackstone," he acknowledged coolly, "I believe you've been looking for us." The older man gestured expansively. "Merely inquiring after the welfare of acquaintances. Won't you join us for dinner?" "No, thank you," Victoria replied before Matthew could speak. "We merely wish to clarify a few matters." Blackstone's companions exchanged glances, clearly uncomfortable with the confrontation brewing. "Perhaps we should continue our business discussion later," one suggested, already rising from his chair. "Nonsense," Blackstone countered, though he made no move to stop them as both men excused themselves and departed. Once they were gone, his pleasant facade dropped. "Well, you've interrupted my dinner and scared away potential investors. What matters need clarifying." Matthew stepped forward. "The sabotage at my mine, for one. 3 good men died when those support beams gave way." Blackstone's expression remained impassive. "A tragedy, certainly. Mining is dangerous work." "Not when the equipment is properly maintained," Matthew countered. "Those beams were sawed through." "Sheriff Miller has confirmed it." Blackstone shrugged. "And what has this to do with me?" "Everything," Victoria interjected, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "Just as you destroyed my father's cattle and burned his hay when I refused your marriage proposal." "Serious accusations," Blackstone replied mildly, "especially without evidence." His cold gaze shifted to Matthew. "I offered you a fair price for that worthless hole in the ground, Porter. You should have taken it." Matthew's jaw tightened. "The deed is in my name, the claim is legally mine. And recent assays show it's far from worthless." "Everything has a price," Blackstone replied, Even you, I suspect." Victoria felt Matthew tense beside her. Before he could respond, she stepped forward. "That's where you're wrong, Mr. Blackstone. Some things can't be bought: honor, decency, true affection." Blackstone's eyes narrowed as they fixed on her. Pretty sentiments from a woman who abandoned her father to financial ruin. The barb struck home, but Victoria refused to show it. "My father made his choices just as I made mine." "Indeed he did." A cruel smile touched Blackstone's lips. "Interesting timing, your visit to Deadwood. Your father's ranch was foreclosed upon yesterday. The bank is selling it at auction next week." Though Victoria had expected this news eventually, hearing it confirmed still hurt. "I'm sorry for him, but not sorry enough to have sacrificed my future to save a piece of land." "Noble," Blackstone mocked. "And yet here you are, attaching yourself to another man with property interests. How convenient." Matthew took a half step forward, his hand dropping to his holstered revolver. "That's enough, Blackstone. Victoria isn't the issue here. The sabotage at my mine is." "Prove it was my doing," Blackstone challenged. "You can't. Just as you can't prove I had anything to do with the Everett ranch's misfortunes." Victoria placed a restraining hand on Matthew's arm. "We don't need to prove it. Everyone in this room knows the truth about you, Jeremiah. A man who uses money and fear to get what he wants isn't respected, he's tolerated, until someone stands against him." Blackstone's face darkened. "Be careful, girl. You're far from hot springs now, with no crowd of sympathetic townsfolk to protect you." "She doesn't need them," Matthew stated firmly. "She has me, and Sheriff Miller, who I believe has just entered the dining room." Indeed, the sheriff now stood in the doorway, watching their confrontation with alert eyes. Two deputies flanked him, their hands resting meaningfully on their weapons. Blackstone glanced at the lawman, his expression calculating. After a moment, he spread his hands in a conciliatory gesture. "It seems we've reached an impasse. You have accusations but no proof. I have business interests but apparently no way to pursue them." He leaned forward. "So let me make one final offer, Porter. $50,000 for your mine. Cash. Enough to buy a substantial ranch wherever you choose." Victoria felt Matthew's surprise at the unexpectedly generous offer. It was indeed enough to establish him comfortably anywhere in the territory. "And in return," Matthew asked cautiously, "you and Miss Everett leave Dakota Territory permanently?" Blackstone's cold eyes flicked between them. "Start fresh somewhere else. California, perhaps, or Oregon." Victoria held her breath, studying Matthew's profile as he considered the offer. It was tempting. She could see that in the momentary hesitation, the slight furrow between his brows. "No," Matthew said finally, his voice firm. "This is my home. Victoria's home too now." Blackstone's pleasant mask slipped, revealing the cold anger beneath. "You're making a mistake, Porter. Both of you." "The only mistake," Victoria replied steadily, "was believing you could control our lives through intimidation and money." For a long moment Blackstone studied them, his expression unreadable. Then, abruptly, he stood. "I believe I've lost my appetite, if you'll excuse me." He strode past them without another word, nodding curtly to Sheriff Miller as he exited the dining room. The tension that had gripped the room gradually dissipated as conversations resumed among the other diners. Miller approached their table. "That went better than I expected. No gunplay." Matthew's shoulders relaxed slightly. "For now, but he won't give up easily." "Maybe not," the sheriff agreed. "But threatening folks in public with witnesses isn't Blackstone's style. He prefers working from the shadows." He glanced toward the door where Blackstone had exited. "I'll have my deputies keep an eye on him while he's in town. And I'll ride out to your mine tomorrow, Porter. Might be time to post a more regular patrol out there." After the sheriff departed, Victoria and Matthew took a table in a quiet corner of the dining room. Though neither had much appetite after the confrontation, they ordered a light supper. $50,000, Victoria mused, breaking the silence that had fallen between them. That's a substantial amount. Matthew studied her across the table. Would you have wanted me to accept? To leave Dakota territory, Victoria considered the question seriously. I would have understood if you had. It was a generous offer, enough to start fresh somewhere safe. But would you have wanted to go? He pressed. She met his gaze directly. I would go anywhere with you, Matthew. But I'm glad you refused. Running away would mean Blackstone wins that intimidation and money can buy whatever he wants. Relief softened his features. That's what I thought too. He reached across the table to take her hand. Besides, I meant what I said. This is home now, for both of us. The simple declaration warmed Victoria's heart. After a lifetime of feeling like her father's property, then briefly becoming a woman without roots or family, hearing Matthew include her in his definition of home felt like a precious gift. They returned to their hotel after dinner, both exhausted from the emotional confrontation and wary of further encounters with Blackstone or his men. Matthew insisted on checking Victoria's room before leaving her for the night, ensuring the windows and door were secure. I'll be right next door if you need anything, he promised, hesitating at the connecting door. Victoria touched his cheek gently. We stood our ground tonight. Whatever happens next, we'll face it together. He turned his face to press a kiss against her palm. Together, he agreed. Sleep came easier than Victoria had expected, the emotional drain of the day overcoming her anxiety about Blackstone's next move. She woke at dawn, feeling surprisingly refreshed and determined. After dressing, she knocked lightly on the connecting door. When Matthew didn't answer, she opened it carefully, finding his room empty. His bed had been slept in but was now neatly made, and his hat and gun belt were missing. A note lay on the bedside table. Gone to check on the mine with Sheriff Miller. Back by noon. Stay in the hotel. M. Victoria frowned at the instruction to remain behind but understood his concern. With several hours to fill before his return, she decided to order breakfast in the hotel's small dining room rather than venturing out into Deadwood's busy streets. She was finishing her coffee when the hotel proprietor approached her table. Miss Everett, there's a gentleman asking for you in the lobby, says it's urgent. Victoria tensed. Did he give his name? Mr. Charles Everett says he's your father. Shock rippled through Victoria. Her father here in Deadwood. It seemed impossible, yet the proprietor's description left little doubt. Thank you, she managed. I'll see him. Heart pounding, Victoria made her way to the lobby. There, standing near the door with his hat in his hands, was indeed Charles Everett. He looked older than when she'd last seen him, his face more lined, his shoulders slightly stooped. Father, she acknowledged cautiously, stopping several feet away from him. Charles Everett's eyes widened as they took in his daughter's appearance. Victoria, you look well. An awkward silence fell between them. After a moment, he cleared his throat. I didn't expect to find you so easily. The desk clerk at the Grand Hotel mentioned you'd been there last night with Porter. Victoria stiffened. How did you know to look for me in Deadwood at all? Her father shifted uncomfortably. Blackstone told me. He came to see me yesterday before I lost the ranch, said he'd found you. Alarm bells rang in Victoria's mind. And he sent you to find me. Why? He didn't send me, Charles protested, though his eyes slid away from hers. I came because you're my daughter, despite everything. Victoria studied him, noting the nervous way he twisted his hat, the slight tremor in his hands. What does Blackstone want, father? The truth. Charles sighed heavily, seeming to deflate. He wants to make a deal with you. Said if you'd agree to meet him alone at his hotel at noon, He'd give me enough money to buy back the ranch. And you agreed to deliver this message." Victoria couldn't keep the disappointment from her voice. Her father had the grace to look ashamed. "I've lost everything, Victoria. The ranch, the cattle, even your mother's silver. Blackstone offered a chance to get it back. At my expense. Again." Victoria shook her head sadly. "Did you ever consider that I might be happy now, that I might have found a life of my own with Porter?" Charles scoffed. "A drifter with a hole in the ground." Victoria straightened her spine. "A man of honor who values me for myself, not as property to be traded." Charles flinched at the rebuke. After a moment he said quietly, "Blackstone won't take no for an answer this time, Victoria. He's determined. And dangerous." "I know exactly how dangerous he is," she replied. "That's why I won't meet him alone." Her father stepped closer, lowering his voice. "He said to tell you that Porter is at the mine, and that accidents happen easily in mine shafts." Cold fear gripped Victoria's heart. "What are you saying?" "Blackstone has men at the mine," Charles admitted reluctantly. "If you don't meet with him by noon, they have orders to make sure Porter doesn't come back up." Victoria's mind raced. Matthew had gone to the mine with Sheriff Miller, but the sheriff might not be enough protection against multiple assailants. "Why are you telling me this?" she demanded. "If you're working with Blackstone, because you're my daughter," Charles interrupted, genuine emotion breaking through his facade. "I've made terrible mistakes. Putting Blackstone's money above your happiness was the worst. I don't expect your forgiveness, but I couldn't be party to what might happen at that mine." Victoria studied her father's face, seeing regret in his eyes that seemed sincere. "If you truly want to make amends, help me warn Matthew." Charles hesitated, then nodded. "I have horses waiting outside. We can reach the mine in less than an hour if we hurry." Victoria considered her options. If her father was telling the truth, Matthew was in grave danger. If he was lying, collaborating with Blackstone in a trap, she would be walking into it willingly. But the alternative, doing nothing while Matthew potentially faced an ambush, was unthinkable. "Let me get my things," she decided. "And father, if this is a trick, if anything happens to Matthew because of your actions, I will never speak to you again as long as I live." Charles nodded soberly. "It's no trick, Victoria. I've lost enough already." Within minutes, they were galloping out of Deadwood, following the winding trail toward Matthew's silver mine in the hills. Victoria's borrowed dress was ill-suited for hard riding, but she ignored the discomfort, focused only on reaching Matthew before Blackstone's men could act. The mine came into view after a grueling hour of hard riding, a substantial operation with several outbuildings, a processing shed, and the main shaft entrance reinforced with thick timber supports. 2 horses were tethered outside Matthew's chestnut stallion and another that likely belonged to Sheriff Miller. "They're still here," Victoria breathed in relief as they dismounted. Charles tied their horses beside the others. "Blackstone's men would be watching from cover. Be careful." Victoria scanned the surrounding hillsides, seeing nothing suspicious but feeling exposed nonetheless. They approached the mine shaft entrance cautiously. "Matthew," she called, her voice echoing slightly in the tunnel. "Sheriff Miller." No response came from the darkness. Victoria's heart raced as she took a step toward the entrance. "Wait," Charles cautioned, catching her arm. "Let me go first." Before Victoria could respond, the crack of a rifle shot split the air. Charles jerked, a look of surprise crossing his face as he fell to his knees. "Father!" Victoria cried, dropping beside him. Blood bloomed across Charles Everett's chest, staining his shirt crimson. "Run!" he gasped. "It's a trap!" More shots rang out from the hillside. Victoria dragged her father behind a stack of timber, seeking cover from the invisible assailants. "Matthew," she called desperately, "Matthew, are you here, Victoria?" His voice came from inside the mine shaft, strained but alive. "Get down!" Relief flooded her at the sound of his voice, quickly replaced by fresh fear as more bullets splintered the wood beside her head. Sheriffs. "Tied up. Inside," Matthew called. "Blackstone's men. Ambushed us." Victoria's fingers found Martha's derringer in her pocket. The tiny weapon seemed woefully inadequate against rifle fire, but it was better than nothing. Beside her, Charles coughed wetly, blood trickling from the corner of his mouth. "Victoria," he whispered, "I'm sorry for everything." She gripped his hand. "Save your strength." He shook his head weakly. "Too late for that, but not too late to help you." With visible effort, he withdrew his revolver from its holster. "Take it, better than that pea-shooter you're holding." Victoria accepted the weapon, its weight substantial in her hand. "I've never fired one of these. Point and pull the trigger," Charles advised, his breathing growing more labored. "And Victoria, I was wrong about everything, about you." His eyes began to lose focus. "So like your mother, strong, proud." Tears blurred Victoria's vision. Despite everything, this was her father dying before her. "I forgive you," she said softly. A ghost of a smile touched his bloodless lips before his eyes closed for the final time. Victoria allowed herself one moment of grief before determination hardened her resolve. Matthew was alive but trapped. The sheriff was captive. And Blackstone's men were closing in. "I count 3 shooters," Matthew called from the mine entrance. "Hillside to the east, behind the processing shed, and near the foreman's cabin." Victoria peered cautiously around the timber stack. The hillside shooter was too far for an accurate shot with a handgun, but the one using the processing shed for cover was closer, perhaps 30 yards away. "If I create a distraction," she called to Matthew, "can you reach my position?" "Too risky," he objected. "Stay under cover." "We need to free the sheriff," Victoria insisted. "I'll draw their fire, you make for the shed." Before Matthew could protest further, Victoria aimed Charles' revolver at a stack of dynamite boxes near the processing shed. The explosion wouldn't reach the shooter, but it might disorient him. She squeezed the trigger. The revolver's recoil was stronger than she'd anticipated, throwing off her aim. Instead of hitting the dynamite, her bullet struck a lantern hanging nearby. Oil spilled across the wooden planks, igniting instantly. The unexpected fire worked even better than her original plan. Shouts of alarm rose from the processing shed as flames spread quickly across the dry timber. The shooter abandoned his position, running to prevent the fire from reaching the stored explosives. "Now," Victoria called. Matthew burst from the mine entrance, sprinting toward her position with surprising speed despite his healing injuries. Bullets kicked up dust at his heels as the hillside shooter tried unsuccessfully to track his movement. He slid into cover beside Victoria, breathing hard. His eyes widened at the sight of Charles Everett's body. "Your father, he came to warn us," Victoria explained briefly. "Blackstone threatened you to make me meet him alone." Matthew's expression darkened. "The sheriff's tied up inside. 3 men jumped us when we entered the mine. I fought back and managed to hide deeper in the shaft, but they captured Miller." His gaze returned to the spreading fire. "We need to move. That blaze will reach the explosive store soon." Victoria nodded toward the hillside. "The shooter there has us pinned down." Matthew checked Charles' revolver, counting the remaining bullets. 5 shots left. I'll make them count." He peered around the timber stack, assessing their options. "There's a gully about 20 yards to our right. If we can reach it, we can circle behind the hillside shooter." Victoria gathered her courage. "I'm ready when you are." Matthew's eyes met hers, intense and serious. "On my signal, run for the gully. Don't stop, don't look back." He took her face in his hands and kissed her quickly. "I love you, Victoria Everett." "I love you too," she whispered. "Now let's end this." Matthew fired 2 rapid shots toward the hillside, forcing the shooter to duck for cover. "Now," he shouted. They ran, exposed and vulnerable, across the open ground toward the gully. Victoria's heart pounded as bullets kicked up dirt around them. Just as they reached the gully's edge, pain blazed across her upper arm. She stumbled but didn't fall, sliding down the embankment with Matthew right behind her. "You're hit," he said urgently, examining her arm. "Just a graze," Victoria assured him, though the wound burned fiercely. "Keep moving." They made their way along the gully, which provided cover as they circled toward the hillside where the shooter had been positioned. By the time they climbed out, the fire at the processing shed had grown substantial, black smoke billowing into the clear sky. Matthew led the way, moving cautiously through scrub brush toward the shooter's last position. They found him just over the ridge, not aiming down at the mine yard any longer, but watching the road from Deadwood. "Expecting reinforcements," Matthew whispered. "Probably Blackstone himself." The man hadn't noticed their approach, his attention fixed on the road. Matthew crept closer, signaling Victoria to stay back. In one swift movement, he brought the butt of Charles' revolver down on the shooter's head. The man crumpled without a sound. "One down," Matthew said, retrieving the man's rifle. "2 to go." They bound the unconscious man with his own belt and made their way back toward the mine yard. The processing shed was now fully engulfed in flames, the heat palpable even at a distance. "We need to get the sheriff out before that fire reaches the explosives," Matthew said grimly. Victoria nodded toward the foreman's cabin. "The third man was positioned there, if we can draw him out." A movement on the road caught her attention. A group of riders approached at a gallop, 5 men led by a figure Victoria instantly recognized as Jeremiah Blackstone. "Complications," Matthew muttered. "We need to move fast." They separated, Matthew circling toward the mine entrance while Victoria approached the foreman's cabin from behind. Her wounded arm throbbed, blood soaking her sleeve, but she pushed the pain aside, focusing on the task at hand. The cabin had a rear window, partially open to catch the summer breeze. Victoria peered cautiously inside, spotting a man standing by the front door, rifle ready as he watched Blackstone's approaching party. Taking a deep breath, she raised her father's revolver and fired through the window. The shot went wide, splintering the doorframe near the man's head. He dove for cover, cursing loudly. Victoria fired again, pinning him down while Matthew made his move at the mine entrance. She couldn't see what was happening there, but the sound of a brief struggle followed by a sharp crack suggested Matthew had encountered and overcome the remaining guard. Blackstone and his men had reached the mine yard now. They dismounted quickly, spreading out as they assessed the chaotic scene: the burning processing shed, the body near the timber stack, the abandoned positions of their advance men. "Porter," Blackstone shouted, "I know you're here. Come out and face me." Victoria held her position at the cabin window, watching as the man inside crept toward the front door, intent on joining his employer. She aimed carefully this time, remembering her father's advice. "Point and pull the trigger." The revolver bucked in her hand. The man at the door jerked, then collapsed, clutching his leg where her bullet had found its mark. In the mine yard, Blackstone and his men had taken cover behind various structures, guns drawn as they searched for the source of the shot. Victoria remained hidden, waiting for Matthew's next move. It came moments later. Sheriff Miller emerged from the mine shaft, followed by Matthew. The sheriff held a rifle likely taken from the guard Matthew had overcome, and despite a bloody gash on his forehead, he looked formidably angry. "Blackstone," Miller shouted, "drop your weapons. All of you are under arrest. Blackstone's response was a scornful laugh. 5 against 2, Sheriff. Poor odds even for a lawman. 3 against 5, Victoria corrected, stepping into view from behind the cabin, her revolver aimed steadily at Blackstone. Still poor odds, but we've surprised you once already today. Matthew's eyes found her across the yard, widening at the sight of her bloodied sleeve. His jaw tightened, but he maintained his position beside the sheriff. "This ends now, Blackstone," Matthew declared. "The sabotage, the threats, all of it. You've already got one man's death on your conscience today." He nodded toward Charles Everett's body. "How many more are you willing to add?" Blackstone's cold eyes assessed the situation, the armed sheriff, Matthew's determined stance, Victoria's unwavering aim, and the rapidly spreading fire that would soon reach dangerous proportions. For a moment, it seemed he might order his men to open fire. Then, surprisingly, he raised his hands. "Stand down," he ordered his men. "This has gone far enough." Sheriff Miller advanced cautiously. Weapons on the ground, slowly. Blackstone complied, his men following suit reluctantly. As Miller collected their guns, Blackstone's gaze fixed on Victoria. "You're more like your father than you know," he observed coldly. "Stubborn to the point of self-destruction." "No," Victoria countered. "My father died trying to undo the harm he caused. He found his honor in the end, something you wouldn't understand." Miller began securing the prisoners with rope from the mine supplies. "Mount up," he ordered Blackstone and his men once they were bound. "We're riding back to Deadwood. Attempted murder, actual murder, sabotage, you'll be facing a proper judge this time, Blackstone." As the sheriff organized the prisoners, Matthew hurried to Victoria's side. "You're hurt," he said, gently examining her wounded arm. "It's just a graze," she assured him, though the pain had intensified now that the immediate danger had passed. "What about you?" Matthew's smile was tired but genuine. "Still standing, thanks to you." He glanced toward Charles Everett's body. "Your father tried to make things right at the end," Victoria finished quietly. "He came to warn us about Blackstone's trap." A distant rumble interrupted them. The fire had reached the explosive store. "We need to move," Matthew urged, supporting Victoria as they hurried toward the horses. "That whole hillside is about to become very unsafe." Sheriff Miller had already mounted, his prisoners secured to their saddles under his watchful eye. Matthew helped Victoria onto her horse, then retrieved his own. They rode away from the mine as the first major explosion rocked the hillside. Looking back, Victoria saw timber, rock, and equipment flying through the air as the stored dynamite detonated. The mine entrance collapsed in a cloud of dust. "Your silver," she said to Matthew, dismayed by the destruction. He shook his head, pulling the deed from his vest pocket. "The claim is still mine. The silver's still in the ground. We can rebuild." His eyes met hers. "If that's what you want." Victoria understood the question behind his words. "What I want," she said clearly, "is a future with you, Matthew Porter, whether that's rebuilding your mine or starting fresh somewhere else." His smile was like sunrise after the longest night. "Then that's what we'll have." 3 months later, Victoria stood on the porch of a newly constructed cabin overlooking the silver mine. The processing shed had been rebuilt, more solidly than before, and a new mine entrance established with reinforced supports. Half a dozen men worked below, extracting the rich silver ore that had made the claim so valuable and so coveted by Jeremiah Blackstone. Blackstone himself now resided in the territorial prison, convicted of multiple crimes including the murder of Charles Everett. His financial empire had crumbled in his absence, his properties sold to cover debts and legal expenses. The Everett Ranch had been among those properties. Joseph Bradley had purchased it at auction, preserving it until Victoria decided whether she wished to reclaim her childhood home. "Penny for your thoughts." Victoria turned to find Matthew watching her from the cabin doorway. The months had healed his injuries completely, returning him to full strength. His face was tanned from working outdoors, his eyes clear and content. "Just thinking how much has changed," she replied, accepting his embrace as he joined her on the porch. "This time last year I was trapped on my father's ranch, dreading a forced marriage to Blackstone." Matthew's arms tightened around her waist. "And now?" Victoria leaned back against his chest, watching the activity below. "Now I'm exactly where I want to be. Even with all this noise and dust," he asked, nodding toward the mine. She smiled. "Even with that. Though I won't object when the new foreman's house is finished and we can move a bit farther from the daily operations." Matthew chuckled, the sound rumbling pleasantly against her back. "Another month, according to the builders." His voice softened. "Just in time for our wedding." Victoria turned in his arms to face him. "Have you reconsidered Joseph's offer to hold the ceremony at Silver Creek?" "No," Matthew replied firmly. "We'll marry here on our own land, begin our life together where our future will be built." His expression grew thoughtful. "Unless you'd prefer Silver Creek, you were happy there." "I was," Victoria agreed, "but this is our home now, yours and mine." Matthew's smile was tender as he bent to kiss her. "Ours," he corrected. "Everything I have is yours, Victoria, including my heart." As the sun began its descent behind the Black Hills, casting long shadows across the land that had tested them so severely, Victoria Everett stood in the protective circle of Matthew Porter's arms. From the ashes of her old life, a life where she had been valued only as property, a pawn in men's negotiations, had risen something beautiful and precious. Freedom, independence, love. The cowboy who had stopped her father's whip that day in Hot Springs had offered more than protection. He had offered partnership, respect, and a love that allowed her to become her strongest, truest self. And she had done the same for him, healing the wounds of his past losses with her courage and devotion, giving him roots after years of drifting, purpose after years of searching. Together, they faced the future not as savior and saved, but as equals who had found in each other exactly what they needed most, someone who saw them clearly and loved them completely. "I love you, Matthew Porter," Victoria whispered against his lips. His answer was both a promise and a certainty. "And I love you, Victoria Everett, today, tomorrow, and all the days that follow." In the distance, the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, bearing witness to a love born in danger but destined to thrive in peace, a love as enduring as the silver in the hills and as boundless as the western sky above them.